In 1990, Judas Priest faced a $6.2 million lawsuit, claiming their music contained hidden messages that drove two teenagers to suicide. The verdict would determine whether artists could be held responsible for their listeners' actions. Inside a Nevada courtroom, heavy metal was put on trial as grieving parents demanded justice for their sons' deaths. This landmark case would transform music censorship forever and establish the legal boundaries that all artists follow today. Church billboards declaring rock music destroys souls lined the highways as Judas Priest toured America in 1985. Fans showed them news footage of their albums burning in suburban driveways. In Washington, D.C., Twisted Sister's Dee Snider defended metal against congressional accusations. That same year, Ray Belknap's mother sat in a church seminar on satanic influences in modern music, where the presenter specifically named Judas Priest albums as dangerous. The fear spreading through America was about to collide directly with the band's music. Reagan's America embraced traditional values despite its neon surface. Church attendance boomed. Evangelical TV hosts reached millions of homes. Pat Robertson told his viewers, "Heavy metal music is nothing more than demonic worship designed to lead our children straight to hell." Local news aired sensational stories with headlines like, "Death metal, is your child at risk?" linking teenage suicides, drugs, and violence to heavy metal. Parents searching for simple answers found them in warnings about satanic messages hidden in records. The panic peaked at the 1985 Senate hearings where Tipper Gore's Parents Music Resource Center demanded warning labels on albums. Frank Zappa testified that censorship proposals were the equivalent of treating dandruff by decapitation. Dee Snider shocked senators by articulating thoughtful defenses of metal music while wearing a suit instead of stage clothes. Despite these defenses, parental advisory stickers soon appeared on explicit albums. This reflected deeper anxieties about changing family life, with 60% of mothers now working outside the home. Many worried about latchkey kids exposed to dangerous influences. In this climate of fear, the suicide pact of two troubled teenagers who listened to Judas Priest became national evidence of metal's supposedly evil power. News reports focused on the music rather than the boys' troubled lives, substance abuse, or mental health struggles. Heat waves distorted the horizon in Sparks, Nevada, a landscape of trailer parks and minimum-wage jobs. Ray Belknap and James Vance carried wounds that formed long before they ever heard Judas Priest's music. Ray's family photos told a different story than court records. Small for his age, with a hesitant smile, he grew up watching his mother cycle through 4 marriages. His stepfather's belt taught him to disappear whenever male authority entered a room. James punched holes in his bedroom drywall, later covering them with heavy metal posters. His biological father vanished before his birth. At 7, teachers found him with a belt tied around his forehead, pulling out clumps of his own hair. A year later, his hands closed around his mother's throat during a car ride home from school. "These weren't just rebellious teenagers," a former teacher said. "These were wounded kids. You could see it in their eyes." Both dropped out at 16. Their minimum wage checks bought beer, marijuana, and heavy metal records. Ray's bedroom became a shrine to Judas Priest, posters covering every wall. James could quote the lyrics like scripture, his mother said, the music giving structure to lives that had none. Ray was always a follower, his mother later testified, voice breaking. And he followed James the most. On December 23, 1985, empty beer cans piled up as Stained Class played on repeat. The shotgun lay loaded nearby. At twilight, Ray placed the barrel under his chin in a church playground. The blast echoed through the quiet neighborhood. His blood soaked into desert sand. James followed suit, but survived, the shotgun destroying his face, but sparing his life. A neighbor found him crawling through dirt making inhuman sounds through what remained of his jaw. From his hospital bed, bandages covering his ruined face, James scratched a note to Ray's mother. "I believe that alcohol and heavy metal music such as Judas Priest led us to be mesmerized." For 3 years, James endured surgeries while nurses changed blood-soaked bandages. On Thanksgiving 1988, his body finally gave up. He slipped into a coma and died 6 days later. The families were left with questions instead of closure. Someone must be responsible, someone with more power than 2 damaged teenagers. They turned toward the British band whose music had played while their sons decided to die. 6,000 miles away, Birmingham's industrial smog hung over England's second-largest city. Factory noise became the life soundtrack for young musicians who would transform heavy metal. Judas Priest's early rehearsal space smelled of cigarettes and cheap beer. The band members' calloused hands, some still bearing factory grease stains, created a sound that defined metal. Twin guitars attacking in harmony while Rob Halford's 4-octave voice soared above. "When we started, people threw bottles at us," guitarist K.K. Downing said, fingers tracing his worn Les Paul. By '78, they were throwing their fists in the air instead. Money was tight. They recorded their second album, Sad Wings of Destiny, on a mere £2,000 budget. Band members often ate just one meal daily, pouring everything into their music. Their uniform of black leather and studs, inspired by Birmingham's motorcycle culture, became armor against rejection. Everything changed when CBS Records signed them for Sin After Sin, their third album. Major label money brought bigger budgets and wider exposure. Their fame grew in England, while tragedy brewed across the Atlantic. In 1978, they entered Chipping Norton Studios to record Stained Class. As sessions finished, CBS executives intervened. They wanted something more commercial to balance the aggressive sound. Better by You, Better Than Me, a Spooky Tooth cover, was hastily added in separate sessions with producer James Guthrie. No one realized this last-minute addition would eventually put them on trial. "Our lyrics have always been about determination," Halford explained, touching the silver chains on his stage clothes. "About never giving up and believing in yourself. That's why our fans connect with us. We give them strength." This message contrasted sharply with growing fears about heavy metal. As Priest's records reached teenagers across America, including Ray Belknap and James Vance, a movement against them gained momentum. Antiseptic smells filled hospital corridors while James Vance underwent his first facial reconstruction. Monitoring equipment beeped rhythmically as his mother Phyllis made a decision. Someone would pay for this damage. "I didn't even know who to call," she later admitted. Which lawyer handles something like this? Kenneth McKenna, a Reno attorney with slicked-back hair and a reputation for difficult cases, listened in his wood-paneled office. His legal pad filled quickly. Ray dead. James disfigured. Judas Priest playing when it happened. The emotional leverage was obvious. In December 1986, 1 year after the Suicide Pact, the lawsuit hit CBS Records' legal department. $6.2 million in damages demanded. The Belknaps wanted $1.2 million. The Vances sought $4 to $5 million, partly for a child James had fathered after his suicide attempt. But the case faced immediate problems. The First Amendment protected song lyrics as free speech. Previous lawsuits against Ozzy Osbourne had established this. McKenna needed another angle. The breakthrough came from a school counselor who had spoken with James. "We got a message," James had told her through his damaged mouth. It said, "Do it." It was telling us to do it. Subliminal messages, content hidden below conscious awareness, became the heart of the lawsuit. Unlike explicit lyrics, these might not get First Amendment protection. The argument was unprecedented in music litigation. The plaintiff's experts claimed to find "Do It" hidden in "Better by You, Better Than Me" during normal playback. They argued these messages bypassed conscious thought and directly influenced vulnerable listeners. When legal papers reached Judas Priest's management, shock turned quickly to horror. "It tore us up emotionally," Halford recalled, voice catching. "Someone was telling the judge that our music kills young people. It felt like being accused of murder." The financial damage mounted quickly. The band and CBS Records spent nearly $250,000 on experts, audio analysis, and legal fees. They postponed their Painkiller tour and album release, losing an estimated $2.1 million in revenue. Promoters refunded over 150,000 concert tickets. Record sales dropped 30% as some stores moved Judas Priest albums behind counters. Nevada television covered every development. Then, national news picked up the story. Religious groups pointed to the case as proof of metal's dangers. What began as personal tragedy became a referendum on music itself. By 1990, both sides prepared for court. Grieving families sought justice. The band fought for survival. The entire music industry watched nervously, knowing their future depended on 5 metal musicians from Birmingham. Television cameras crowded the courthouse entrance under the July sun. Inside, Court 2B overflowed with spectators. Reporters, locals, and metal fans in faded concert shirts packed the wooden benches, shoulder to shoulder. Judge Jerry Carr Whitehead entered on July 16, 1990. The weathered Nevada native rarely saw cases with international attention, like Vance versus Judas Priest. "This is the most bizarre case I've ever been assigned," he told his clerk privately. For 6 weeks, the courtroom became an audio lab testing the boundaries of perception and responsibility. Experts with oscilloscopes and spectrographs analyzed sound waves while boomboxes played heavy metal that made the court reporter wince. Wilson Bryan Key, who wrote books on subliminal advertising, testified first. Jurors leaned forward trying to understand terms like auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find familiar patterns in random sound. When played normally, Key insisted, pointing at waveform displays, certain sounds in "Better by You, Better Than Me" create the subliminal command "Do It," bypassing conscious awareness and directly influencing vulnerable listeners. Judge Whitehead took the unprecedented step of moving proceedings to a recording studio. Attorneys and witnesses crowded around equipment, passing headphones and arguing over barely perceptible sounds. The judge himself listened repeatedly, his expression unreadable. The defense fought back methodically. CBS Records brought audio engineers from major universities who testified that supposed messages were simply random noise, like seeing shapes in clouds. Rob Halford's testimony created the trial's most powerful moment. Wearing a conservative suit instead of stage leather, he answered questions about songwriting with careful precision. Then he did something extraordinary. He stood and performed "Better by You, Better Than Me," a cappella. His powerful voice filled the hushed courtroom. Court officers, initially startled, relaxed when the judge nodded approval. In a decisive demonstration, Halford showed exactly what plaintiffs claimed was a hidden "do it" message. He isolated his breathing technique between vocal phrases and demonstrated how his natural breath intake, something all singers must do, created the sound in question. The simple physics of air passing through his vocal cords became the supposed sinister command that allegedly drove 2 teenagers to suicide. I think that's when the judge thought, "What am I doing here?" Halford later said, "No band tries to kill its fans." In his most memorable statement, Halford testified, "If we were going to put subliminal commands on an album, we'd say, 'Buy more of our records.' That makes more sense than telling fans to kill themselves." Guitarist Glenn Tipton described their own investigation. "We bought stained glass from a local shop and played it backward. We heard phrases like, "Hey Mom, my chair's broken," and "Give me a peppermint." You can hear anything if you're looking for it. The human cost remained visible throughout. Ray's mother clutched tissues while autopsy photos were shown. James's father stared at the floor during testimony about his son's final days. Across the room, band members looked haggard, their tour-hardened composure cracking under accusations of causing deaths. The defense team brought various albums, not just metal but even Frank Sinatra records, demonstrating how playing them backward created seemingly meaningful phrases. This effectively showed how subjective such interpretations were. As weeks passed, the scientific case fell apart. Experts contradicted each other about whether subliminal messages could influence behavior. Psychology professors testified that no study had ever shown subliminal commands could trigger complex actions like suicide. After 6 grueling weeks, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Whitehead retreated with 93 legal pads of notes. Record executives, artists, and free speech advocates held their breath, knowing the music industry's future hung in the balance. Reporters jostled for position on the courthouse steps under August's brutal sun. Camera crews adjusted focus. Legal analysts whispered predictions. Inside, Judge Whitehead's 93-page ruling landed on the clerk's desk. For Judas Priest, August 24, 1990 would either vindicate their art or destroy their career. Tension broke as the ruling circulated. Case dismissed. Yet the decision contained nuance that would reshape music law for decades. Whitehead acknowledged hearing sounds resembling "Do It" in the recording, but concluded they were only discernible after their location had been identified and after the sounds were isolated and amplified. Under normal listening conditions, no teenager would consciously hear these sounds. The critical finding came on page 59. The words "do it" are the result of a chance combination of sounds. The words were not intentionally formed. For liability, the families needed to prove a clear, conscious, and intentional act by the band, a standard they couldn't meet. Cameras flashed as Halford emerged. His face showed exhaustion instead of triumph. "This is a great day for Judas Priest and for all artists in America," he told reporters, voice hoarse from weeks of testimony. The verdict freed the band from legal blame but wasn't the complete victory they wanted. Despite winning, they had lost a fortune. Their $250,000 legal bill hit hard for musicians who once budgeted single daily meals to keep recording. Across the plaza, Attorney McKenna stood with the families. "We're disappointed," he stated flatly, adjusting his tie against the desert wind. "But I doubt there will be an appeal." The families' faces remained blank, grief having hardened into resignation. The verdict established a precedent that still affects entertainment law today. Whitehead created a crucial distinction. Overt lyrics received full First Amendment protection, but subliminal messages did not. Had the families proven intentional hidden messages existed, they might have won. This loophole, though narrow, remains in music litigation. The effects spread quickly through American music. By 1992, about 225 records carried parental advisory labels, 5 times more than when the system began. Record companies scrambled to shield themselves from potential lawsuits, changing how music reached consumers. Fear drove sweeping industry changes. Labels created in-house lyric review panels with unprecedented power to scrutinize songs before release. Artists faced pressure to alter lyrics and artwork as creative freedom gave way to risk management. Executives worried openly about a chilling effect on artistic expression. The financial impact hit immediately. When Walmart refused to stock labeled albums, artists faced a painful choice: create clean versions or lose access to America's largest music retailer. Record companies absorbed substantial costs creating sanitized alternatives while already fighting declining album sales. Ironically, the warning labels became powerful marketing tools. Albums with parental advisory stickers often saw sales increase 10 to 30% compared to clean versions. Teenagers sought out the marked records precisely because adults deemed them dangerous, turning warning signs into beacons for rebellion. Within weeks of the verdict, Judas Priest fought back with their music. Their Painkiller album released in September 1990, its aggressive sound reflecting the battle they'd endured. At their first concert back, they played Better by You, Better Than Me, live for the first time since 1979. The crowd erupted. A once forgettable cover song had become an anthem of defiance. Desert heat still creates mirages in Nevada, just as it did when two troubled teenagers made their suicide pact in 1985. The church playground where Ray died and James was maimed has been renovated, blood-stained sand replaced by rubber safety mats. Few children playing there know what happened. Rob Halford still occasionally performs Better by You, Better Than Me to packed venues, his voice remarkably preserved. When those opening notes play, only dedicated fans understand they're hearing more than music. They're witnessing a declaration of artistic freedom purchased at enormous cost. The $6 million lawsuit that never paid a cent exacted its price from everyone involved. The Vance and Belknap families never found the closure they sought in court. Their grief remains, though the legal battle has faded into history. For Judas Priest, the financial cost, hundreds of thousands in legal fees, millions in delayed albums and canceled tours, was eventually recovered. The emotional toll remains immeasurable. It tore us up hearing someone say we make music that kills young people, Halford admitted. Going to court is still a strong memory because at the heart was a great sadness that these hardcore Priest fans had lost their lives. We'll carry that forever. Today's musicians work in an industry shaped by this landmark case. Artists enjoy strong First Amendment protection for their lyrics, but recording techniques face greater scrutiny. The line between artistic freedom and potential liability, first drawn in Whitehead's 93-page ruling, still guides industry practices. The case's legacy contains contradiction. The lawsuit failed yet succeeded in changing music history. It centered on two teenagers' deaths, yet its lasting impact concerns artistic life. It sought to restrict content, yet ultimately strengthened protections for creative expression. When Halford sang before that skeptical judge in 1990, he defended more than Judas Priest. He defended the principle that artists cannot be held responsible for how audiences interpret their work. That principle now shields countless creators across all media. The $6 million that never changed hands changed everything else.